Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Grabowski. I'm the chair of the communication department here at Manhattan College, and very excited for this very special evening with Jared Diamond. He is the reporter who covers Major League Baseball for the Wall Street Journal. And this fall, he will be teaching a course for the communication department at Manhattan College, Con 336. It's sports reporting and writing. So if you're interested in that class, it'll be offered on Monday evenings at 6:30 p.m. So I'm really excited to have this conversation begin. We have several students from our communication department joining us in this Google Meet, and they're excited to ask questions. We also have several prospective students and members of the public watching on the YouTube live stream. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat, and then later students in the Google Meet will have an opportunity to ask questions directly. But before we begin this, I just want to tell you a little bit about the communication department. We specialize in teaching about the intersections between media and communication, especially how communication works, how media influences communication, and ethical approaches to communication. So we start with that foundational theory of communication. In addition to that, we have 6 concentrations to help prepare you to work in the media industries in New York and around the world. We offer advertising, integrated marketing communications, and public relations. These are client-centered, outward-focusing communication strategies. In addition to that, we also offer journalism, media production, including film and television, and sports media production. Sports media production is one of our newest concentrations, and it's in partnership with ESPN. Our students in sports media production actually work producing live sports broadcasts that appear on ESPN+. So Manhattan College is a Division I NCAA school, and so for the last 2 years, we've been producing men's and women's basketball game live for ESPN+ and ESPN3. We also, in the very near future, will be expanding to other sports, including volleyball, lacrosse, softball, baseball, and soccer, among other sports. So we're really excited about that program. We have a 4K TV studio that right on the campus that our students produce in. We also have a college-wide television club, MCTV. They produce several events and live and recorded broadcasts that they post after shooting in our TV studio. We have also field production. A lot of our students are producing videos out in the community, and we're using professional facilities, including our mobile production unit. We're able to bring this to different venues, and the really exciting thing about this mobile production unit is that in about 2 weeks, it's going down to Atlantic City, and it will be used to produce the entire MAC tournament to be broadcast live on ESPN. So that is happening in Atlantic City in a couple of weeks, and several of our students are heading down there with our producer director, Joe Ruggiero. Here he is directing a basketball game live. They'll all be heading down to Atlantic City to work those games. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Jared Diamond.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm very excited for next fall. So I'm hoping I'll get to meet at least some of the people here a lot more next semester. Hopefully next semester is a little bit more normal than this one, and we'll be able to do things like this in person and not over Google Meet. I think we're all looking forward to that. So I absolutely want to make sure I get to answer all of your questions. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you a little bit about who I am, my career, and sort of what I do for the Wall Street Journal. I've been at the Wall Street Journal now for 10 years, which is completely insane to think about. I just had my 10-year anniversary starting at the Journal. And like you've heard, I'm the national baseball writer at the Wall Street Journal, which means I am responsible for our coverage of that whole industry. You know, Major League Baseball is an 11 or $12 billion industry, so that's what I cover. But during my time at the Journal, I've covered pretty much just about everything. I've covered Super Bowl. I've covered multiple Final Fours and college football championship games and Stanley Cups. The only thing I really haven't covered that's still on my list is the Olympics. I was supposed to go to Japan last year. Unfortunately, that did not happen. So that's something for hopefully down the road. But where I'd like to start is sort of how I got to where I am now. A lot of people here, at least some, are probably interested in pursuing a career in journalism. And I know when I was in college, the idea of getting a job seemed remarkably daunting and almost impossible. And I always found it very helpful to sort of hear people who made it and found something, how they sort of got there and what their path was. Everyone's path in this industry is obviously very different, and my story might not necessarily be yours, but I do think there are some lessons that are applicable to everybody as they sort of proceed, not just in journalism, but really, I think in any industry or in sports media or any sort of field like this. So, this is something I've always wanted to do. This was my dream job. When I was in the third grade, I started typing up a sports, I would just say it's called a newsletter. It was more like a sheet of paper that I typed up on a computer using Windows 3.1, which probably no one here has ever heard of except for the three other adults, professors in the room. And since we didn't have a printer, because home printers were not really a thing yet, my dad had to go print it out in the office, and I would bring it and put it in people's sort of mailbox cubby holes in elementary school. So that was sort of my first foray into journalism. But as I got older, I was the sports editor of my high school paper. I worked for a local newspaper in my hometown. I grew up in Westchester, so not too far away from your campus, just about maybe 15, 20 minutes away from your campus just north. I ended up going to Syracuse University. I was in the communications program there. And on the first day I arrived on campus, I went to the student newspaper, which is called the Daily Orange. And I said, I really want to cover sports, and I'll do anything you want. And the sports editor said, okay, do you know anything about cross country? And I said, yes, even though I did not. I knew nothing at all, but I didn't really care. I just wanted the opportunity to do it, which the point I'm making with that story is a lot of people in this room are working, doing sports media production or working at the student paper or other sort of campus media. Great, you're off to an amazing start. That's sort of the first place, the biggest sort of piece of advice I always give to people is if you want to pursue this field, the best way to do it is go do it. So just by being in this program, by doing this incredible partnership with ESPN Plus or whatever it's called now, or the Quadrangle, I think that's what it's called. Forgive me if I'm wrong. I did have a story about me in it, so I should know. It was very good if the authors are in this room. That's just a great place to start. So anyway, at the Daily Orange, I ended up becoming sports editor. I covered the Syracuse football team for 2 years when they were absolutely horrible. In my 4 years at Syracuse, I think the football team won 10 games, maybe. That might be a stretch. I also covered the basketball team for 1 year. I had an opportunity to cover a game that shockingly means you were all in elementary school when this happened, but a crazy 6 overtime Big East tournament game between Syracuse and UConn, when none of that sentence doesn't make any sense to anyone anymore, since the Big East is basically dead and the Big East tournament's basically dead, and this all happened 10 years ago, but trust me, it was a big deal at the time. So I got to do a lot of really cool stuff, and I had internships sort of throughout the process. And this is sort of what led to me getting at the Journal. After my junior year of college, I had an internship at MLB.com, which is an amazing internship. Baseball has always been my favorite sport. It was always my dream to cover baseball, and I had an internship at MLB.com covering the Yankees. It was a really cool gig. I was sort of in the clubhouse, my first time in a baseball clubhouse, my first time in a baseball press box. Really cool gig. And I'd be in the clubhouse. I was 19 years old. I was terrified. Derek Jeter's in the room, Mariano Rivera's in the room. I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't really have very much support from anybody. And most of the other reporters that were around were not very nice to me, as like the little intern who was just kind of getting in their way and clearly didn't know what was going on, except for this one guy, and sort of an older guy, someone who I did not know as his name. I didn't recognize. He worked for the Sporting News at the time, which was not sort of the booming publication it once was. His name was Bill Eichenberger. And he was always very nice to me. And he always sort of was trying to help me out on the internship, even though we worked for different places. I didn't know anything about him, didn't really think much of it, but I really appreciated that he took an interest in me. So I tried my best to stay in touch with him as the internship ended. I would see him at various other sort of New York media events. Anyway, fast forward now about 18 months. I had just graduated from college. I had an internship at a newspaper called the Virginian Pilot, which is in Norfolk, Virginia, really cool town. Covering high school football and minor league baseball, 6-month program. Had no idea what I was going to do when the internship ended. They weren't going to be able to hire me to stay on full time. So I was prepared to come back to New York and be unemployed and figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I saw an article in the New York Post saying that the Wall Street Journal just started a sports section, and the editor was Bill Eichenberger, which then, of course, this incredible rush came over me because, hey, that's that guy that was really nice to me on the internship, a year and a half ago. I wonder if he remembers me. So I decided to just cold call him or cold email him at the Journal saying, hey, you probably don't remember who I am at all, but you were so nice to me when I was an intern a year and a half ago. And I saw you're, working at the Wall Street Journal now, and you're the editor, and I don't know what I'm to do with my life, and whatever I said. And to my big surprise, he wrote back saying, I do remember you. And oh, by the way, we have a entry-level job open right now. Do you want to come in and meet my boss next week? And anyway, the rest is history. I ended up getting the job. But the reason I always tell that story is I think the real lesson, the real takeaway for me of how I got to the Journal was you never know who the person will be that will sort of make your career, or will be your mentor, or will be the person that opens the door for you, which means treat everybody you meet everywhere professionally as the person who can be the person who makes your career. When I was an intern and standing in the Yankee clubhouse, I never in a million years would have imagined that this guy from the Sporting News, this older guy who's probably in his 60s at the time, I had no idea who he was, never could have imagined this would be the person who would open the door for me to my dream job. But he did. And I want to believe it's because I did my best to stay in touch with him. I did my best to, consider him someone that had the opportunity to do this for me, even though it never seemed possible. It turned out, little did I know at the time, that this guy, Bill, was an incredibly accomplished editor who had been sports editor at many papers all around the country. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, and I never did any research. I should have. So it was really fortuitous, but it just goes to show you the value of making these connections and treating everyone you meet in this field as the person that could make your career. So that's sort of why I always tell that story about Bill. Also, I just love to get to talk about Bill Eichenberger. He's now the sports editor at the Las Vegas Review-Journal, no longer works at the Wall Street Journal. Still an incredible mentor. He's actually my teaching mentor because he has been a professor for a long time and has been sort of helping me with my curriculum for next semester. So that's sort of the story of how I got to the Journal. Now at the Wall Street Journal, I've had a kind of interesting path. I did not get there just covering baseball right away, although that was my goal. I was 22 years old when I got hired at the Journal. I was what was known as a reporting assistant, which is basically an intern with health benefits, is the way I would describe it. It was the definition of an entry-level job. I would, I essentially would write 300 words at a time. I would only do the stories that nobody else wanted. But it was fine. I was thrilled to be there because there was this incredible journalism education, being surrounded by people who were incredibly accomplished at this really great publication. And it took me about 2 years before I got the opportunity to go cover baseball. As people move, there's matriculation, people move to other desks. Unfortunately, I had the opportunity. But being at the Wall Street Journal at such a young age was really eye-opening, because when I got there, I really believed that I kind of knew what I was doing. You know, I'd had really good success in college. I had really good success on all my internships. You know, I had just gotten back from the Virginian Pilot, and I feel like, okay, I think I'm ready to do this. Getting to the Wall Street Journal was a huge eye-opening experience about how much I didn't know. Particularly, what I didn't know was how to really report, how to own a beat, how to make a beat your own. In college, in internships, I spent so much of my time working on my writing, how to be a good writer, which is crucial. And we spent time learning how to sort of do basic story structure. What does a lead look like? What does a nut graph look like? How do you weave in quotes? How do you do basic interviewing tactics? But what I didn't know and didn't understand is something that I hope to really talk about in a lot more detail in my class, is how do you figure out what to write about? That was something I had no clue about when I was starting in my professional career. You know, on internships or in college, and probably in classes, a lot of classes too, you're basically told what to write about. You know, you're say, go cover this, or go give us a story on this topic, this event that's happening in the community. Suddenly, I'm now covering Major League Baseball for the Wall Street Journal with no guidance at all. No one's telling me what to do. It's, hey, your job is to provide regular baseball stories, and you have to break news, and you have to do interesting features, and no one's going to help you or tell you what to do, and just go do it. Just go do it. And I really had no clue how to do it. So, which is why, like I said, I really hope to flesh this out a lot more next semester. But one thing I felt like I didn't really know coming out of college was how much of this job is creative story idea generation, figuring out what's interesting, what could I write that's different than everything else that's ever been written before. There's so much media out there. There's so much competition out there, and everyone's sort of writing the same stuff a lot of the time. You know, if you're covering a Manhattan College basketball game, and there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 in some of these beats, or in a big event like the Super Bowl, hundreds of people all writing about the same thing, how do you stand out? How do you make your story the one that people read? Which gets to what I think is sort of an important sort of mission statement about what sports writing is and what sports media is. I feel like there's still a perception, especially among young people, among general readers, that what we do in this industry is just writing or talking about what happened in the game, or for breaking down what might happen in the next game. I never have seen it that way. I believe that sports writing is really about people. Sports writing is people writing first and foremost. Yes, it's under the sort of umbrella of the games that people play, but we have the ability to learn so much about society, about people, about how the world works through these games. Athletes, while they're incredible and have incredible skills that we can never dream of, for most of us, I think there's some athletes in the room who probably can imagine some of these things. But they're still just people who have stories to tell. And our job as sports writers is not to write about, you know, how many points they score in a game or how many yards they throw for, but it's what makes them interesting as people. What I love about this industry, about sports journalism, is we do everything. All kinds of journalism sort of gets folded into sports writing. You hear a lot in the professional world that the sports section is the toy department of a newspaper. It's a pejorative. It's used as an insult that sports writers are not real journalists. I so strongly disagree with that. And in the introduction, just before we started talking, you've heard a little about sort of the kinds of things that I write about. In a given week or a given month, I will be writing about, labor. Right now, baseball labor is a very big issue. They're dealing with a lot of complications there. I'm writing about health and science, plenty right now, due to the fact that we're trying to figure out how to play sports in a pandemic. You're writing about economics. You're writing about business. You're writing about technology. Sports and technology is now a huge part of the industry in terms of new training programs and whatnot. You're writing about crime. Right now, Tiger Woods, the biggest story in the sports media because of his terrible car accident. So suddenly you're writing about sort of this big breaking, not crime exactly, but big news event. And that's what I love about sports writing. And it's why I think there's a real opportunity to flex all of these muscles. And it's what makes it so fun. And sometimes when Fernando Tatis signs a $340 million contract or Tiger Woods flips over his car, you know what you're doing. You're going to go and you're going to write that as well as you can. But sometimes you don't. And I think those are the most fun times when you don't know what to write about and you have to go sort of figure it out. In a given day, sort of how I sort of structure my day. I think this is another question I get a lot. What do you do all day? So I was going to give you a quick sort of walkthrough of my normal day. It's a little different right now because we're still in a pandemic and I can't go talk to people in real life, which really stinks. But the first thing I do every day when I wake up is I spend at least an hour just reading a ton, reading everything I could find that was written about baseball, basically, that day or the day before or that morning. As the national baseball writer, I cover all 30 teams. So I make it my goal every single day to try to read one thing about every single team, just to try to get a sense of what's going on in the landscape. And there's a reason I do that. And it pays off frequently, is oftentimes you'll find that I'll read 5-6 stories from 5 or 6 different teams. And they'll all be talking about something similar, but only in the narrow sort of window of their team. That's when you start realizing, hey, this is a good story of the same thing is happening on 5 or 6 teams. Maybe it's a larger sort of trend story. In fact, that's how my book started. My book started because I read a story about Josh Donaldson, who at the time was with the Toronto Blue Jays, a great hitter, who had changed his swing after going to work with this really wacky, weirdo outsider hitting coach. And then 3 weeks later, I read another story about Justin Turner doing the exact same thing with a completely different hitting coach. And then 3 weeks after that, I read another story about JD Martinez going to do the same thing with a different hitting coach. And suddenly I'm like, hey, this is not a one-off story. This is a larger story about a huge fundamental change happening in the industry. And I went and wrote a story about that for the Wall Street Journal, wrote that story, turned out, hey, I think there's still more to say about this topic. And it sort of turned into my book. So I really do believe the best way to come up with story ideas and just be a good writer is read a ton. You cannot be a good writer if you don't read. How do you know what good writing is if you're not reading good writing? So definitely as you sort of proceed in your college career, in your career, just think about reading a lot. Read good writing, find writers you like, try to sort of understand why you like them, and try to sort of bring that voice into your own and sort of mold your own voice. Anyway, after I'm done reading, the rest of my day is often just talking to people on the phone or on Zoom these days or on Google Meets. I spend a lot of time calling people for no reason, just to say hi, just to check in, just to say, hey, what's going on in your world right now? Here's what's going on in mine. 90% of the time, nothing's happening. But if every once in a while there is a great story there that someone's just burning up to tell you. So it sort of plays back into what I was talking about with my mentor who got me this job at the Journal. it's about relationships. Like I said, sports writing is people writing, and the best way to do it is to spend as much time as you can around people, talking to people, even when you have no reason to talk to them. Find reasons, make excuses, find reasons to follow up and to sort of connect with people. I do want to, could we take a couple questions actually? I feel like there are some, and I don't want to just ramble on without getting to some of them at least.
Sure, of course. I mean, I think that being in touch with people is important. One thing I want to mention is when Dr. Quinn and I were meeting with you and talking about the talk, can you tell our students about how you were interrupted by Dan, who's called a call you had to take while we were on the phone?
Oh God, yes. So we were all on a call like this, getting ready for this talk, and I came on, and suddenly my phone rings, and I guess I really shouldn't say who it was, especially if this is going to be on YouTube. But it's okay. It was somebody important from the baseball world who was calling me out of the blue, and I had to say excuse me to my future bosses, which was very uncomfortable, to go take this call. And the reason I had to do it was I knew that if I did not pick up that phone call, there was a 0% chance I was going to get another chance at that call. If that call went to voicemail and I said, tried to call that person back, that person never would have picked up the phone again. You kind of got one shot, which is sort of another good lesson in sort of how to manage a beat, knowing how people tick or how people will respond to things. There's some people that I could have let that call go to voicemail and called them back 15 minutes later. It would have been totally fine. But with that person, never would have happened. So I made them wait on. They saw me talk, but didn't hear me, right? I was on mute.
You're right? You were muted. You were fine.
But you just heard. You just saw my
appropriate crosstalk.
You saw my animated. My animated gesticulations on the phone. So anyway, thank you for not firing me right then and there, for leaving you guys hanging.
Not an issue. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because it's an example of cultivating those kinds of relationships that are so important. And so I want to go. We have a bunch of questions from our students who are here in the meet, which is great. So folks who have questions, I'd like you. I know many of you, but not all of you. So before you ask Jared your question, please identify yourself, say what your name is, say what your major or concentration is, and then offer the questions that you have. So I will go in the approximate order in which I think I saw stuff. So Noel Spillane, I think I saw your hand first or early on. So why don't you shoot?
Hi, my name's Noel Spillane. I'm a junior. My concentration is PR. And you were talking about how you call people and you talk to lots of people. Are those people players or front office, and how do you build and maintain those relationships?
Yeah, it's a great question. All of the above, to answer the first part of the question. Anyone that's sort of in or around the baseball industry is someone that I want to know, and someone that I want to talk to, and someone who I want to build a relationship with. But the second question you asked, how do you do it? That is the $1 million question in this industry. And I wish there was a better answer than the one I'm about to give, but the answer is just time and trust. Building a relationship with sources and people on your beat is really no different in many ways than building a relationship with anybody, with a friend, someone in your class, someone in school. How do you get to a place where there's a relationship built on mutual trust? Time and effort on both sides. Really more your side as the journalist, but time. There's really no substitute for it. I would say my first 3 years covering baseball were really hard. I mean, it's still really hard, but it was way harder my first 2 or 3 years. I didn't know anybody. I knew no one. I didn't have any phone numbers. I didn't have a Rolodex. Do people still know what Rolodexes are? Probably not. A iPhone contacts app filled with people that I could check in with. I was very reliant. You said you're a public relations major. I was extremely reliant on team public relations people to sort of help me get in touch with people, which is never a place you want to be. as a journalist. You will not have great success if you're relying on others in that way, especially especially team PR people who might have different aims and goals than you have as a journalist. So it just took a lot of time. It took me finding reasons to set up interviews with people. And then once I had that person's phone number, finding reasons to text them and call them again. Sometimes the reason would be very silly or nebulous or vague, but that's the job. The job is making those excuses to reach out to people. Generally, a lot of people are not going to be very trusting of the media. So it makes it your responsibility and your job as a reporter to get them to trust you. And the only way to do that is just time, write good story. Like when you work with them on a story, don't burn them, right? Write a story that is reflective of what you talked about. And the more you do that, the more likely they will want to work with you again. One thing I want to talk about before we get to another question, but this sort of segues into it. I was going to talk about it a bit later. Some of you who have followed any of my work at all might know my name from a couple stories I had about a year ago, actually almost exactly 1 year ago, about the Houston Astros. If you all probably know, they were involved with a insane scandal revolving sign stealing and cheating, and it was really crazy. And everyone kind of forgot about it 6 weeks later because the pandemic happened. But before the pandemic, it was a huge deal. If anyone can remember, back before the pandemic, it was the only thing anyone was talking about in baseball was the Astros. It feels like a million years ago. And I had a couple of stories that ended up kind of blowing up that broke some pretty interesting news about the scandal, and always the best kind of story when you could show that people knew things they say they didn't know, and they're not being totally honest with how much they really knew. And I really can't talk too much about how those stories came to be. I wish I could. I'm hoping one day, in like 30 years from now, I will be able to. I get asked, I would say, at the time I was being asked every day by someone in the baseball industry, where did that story come from? And I cannot talk about it at all. But what I can say about it is it came from an extremely, extremely unexpected place. Someone who I had known and worked with in a completely different context, besides this story about the Astros, someone who I had worked with on other stories a year prior and stayed in touch with. And then suddenly, by some incredible fortuitous situation, this person happened to be in the position to know something really crazy about the Astros. And because we had worked together over time and we had built up a relationship over a year doing other stories and staying in touch, he came to me and said, I have this amazing story for you. And I wish I could get into it a little bit more. It's an amazing story. Maybe one day I'll be able to talk about it. But the lesson there was like, that's how those relationships pay off. Again, you don't know how the relationship will end up helping you down the road. Just like, again, sort of how they got the job. So again, treat everyone that you deal with on these beats in this profession as someone valuable to you, because it turned out this person really turned out to be. It just took about a year.
Sure, and actually, and Jared told you everything he told us, because Dr. Quinn and I also asked him about this. So he did not disclose anything else to us and spoke about it just as circumspectly in our conversations as he did with you just now. Just so you know, we're also of course interested. So Thomas Courtney, I think you were a pretty early hand. Introduce yourself to us, well, more to Jared, and ask away.
How's it going? Thank you for coming today. My name is Thomas Courtney. I'm a sports media production concentration, and I just want to ask, at this point in time, technology and media has evolved to allow us to easily have conversations like this, but it also allows for easier conversations. But during the COVID pandemic, how difficult has it been keeping your connections personal and to build trust and to like get that special story and to maintain those connections, as well as kind of build new ones with people you don't know during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's been extremely hard. Doing this job during the pandemic, this has been the most challenging time I've ever had, excuse me, doing it. And the reason for that is, like you said, we've lost that face-to-face access. I have not been in a baseball clubhouse since, the March of 2019. I have not been face-to-face in real life with someone in my industry since the middle of March 2019. All interviews now are done over Zoom. And 99% of those interviews are done in settings like this, where I'm in a big group with 20 other reporters all talking to the same person. That's not the best way to get good stories. It's certainly not a way to forge any sort of relationship with people. And I think the coverage, sports coverage in general, has very much suffered during the pandemic because we've all lost that face-to-face access. On my beat in baseball, I'm typically, in normal times, I'd be in the clubhouse with the players every day for 2 hours before a game. And it's just a free-for-all. I'm able to roam the locker room and go up to players as they come to their lockers and chat with them one-on-one and build relationships that way. Normally, normal times in February, I would not be sitting in my apartment. I would be at spring training. I would be in Arizona right now, probably, or maybe Florida. And I would be spending my days roaming team facilities and chatting with everyone I could find, because everyone's just sort of roaming around, and you have serendipitous meetings with people and you get to talk to players and talk to the executives. All that's gone now. So we're doing it all over Zoom, which makes your job a little trickier, because then it's like, okay, since I'm not gonna be able to talk to people one-on-one in the same way I'm able to, I'm not gonna be able to just walk up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm Jared. I have some questions for you." Everything's going to be done sort of communally. How do I distinguish myself? How do I write something that nobody else is writing when all the interviews with players are all done, over Zoom? So look, having experience doing this makes it a little bit easier, because I am able to call people. I know I have every GM's phone number. I know agents who could sometimes get me in touch with players one-on-one, but you can't always rely on that. So the way you do it is with creative thinking. And here's an example. I'm sure those who follow baseball saw that on Thursday of last week, I think, I mentioned Fernando Tatis Jr. He signed a $340 million contract extension. I can't believe a human being signed a contract for $340 million, but he did. I should have been a professional baseball player. And everyone in the world wrote about this because, of course, they did. And Fernando had a Zoom, and they sent out press releases and whatever they do, and people just sort of wrote about it. And I thought to myself, I got to do something different. How do I take this story that everybody is talking about and do it in a way that will make me stand out and make the Wall Street Journal stand out, and make it so people are coming to the Wall Street Journal and not the New York Times or not the Washington Post or not Bleacher Report or Twitter or Reddit or whatever, which is how I ended up with a story that ran over the weekend. I may have run on Friday about Fernando Tatis. Wasn't exactly about his contract. A piece of information that I had known about Fernando Tatis Jr. Going back a few years was that he had signed a deal as a teenager with a company called Big League Advance. You guys probably don't know what Big League Advance is. It is a company that gives minor leaguers money up front in exchange for a set percentage of their career earnings. Doesn't really sound like a good deal. So Fernando Tatis Jr. signed a contract with this company. We don't know exactly for how much, but believed to be about 8 to 10% of his career earnings, which means when he signed that $340 million contract, he was also giving himself a $30 million bill to this random company that probably paid him like $1 million when he was 18 years old. So the night that contract was signed, I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning calling the CEO of this company and everyone around Fernando Tatis to try to get some information about how this deal went down and find out as much as I could about it. Wrote a story about it the next day, and ended up being incredibly successful, and it was read by hundreds of thousands of people. And I think the reason for that was it took this big story in the news and found a different spin on it. It found something beyond just he signed this contract. So those kind of stories are even more important during the pandemic because we don't have the kind of access we're used to having. So it's okay. I can't go talk to people face to face. So what can I do that's going to make me stand out?
How about Julene Barrett? Why don't you ask Jared your question or questions?
Hi, thank you for being here tonight. I'm Julene Barrett. I'm a communication major with a concentration in journalism and public relations, and I'm also the managing editor of The Quadrangle. So for The Quadrangle, I'm required to write a certain amount of news of sports stories, but that's not necessarily my niche. How would you advise to get more into sports writing when it's not necessarily my passion?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Also, thanks for writing about someone who wrote about me. Thank you. Very nice. I saw that story in The Quadrangle the other day. So it's a really interesting question. And I get this a lot, actually, in terms of like sort of a bit of a little different spin on it, which is like, do you just like know everything about sports? Or like, are you just obsessed with sports? And guess what? No, I'm not. I do love baseball. I love baseball really with a lot of passion, but there's really no other sport that I love that I would say I follow outside of a professional setting. Yet I'm still able to write about it. I go back to what I talked about before, my first day at the college paper when he said, do you want to write about, do you know anything about cross country? And of course I didn't, but it didn't matter because you really don't need to be a sports expert to be a good sports writer. Remember, we're not, in this job, we're not sports analysts. It's not our job to sort of predict, who's going to win, or it's not our job to like break down the mechanics of curveball or break down someone's swing or whatever it is. There's other people who do that job. There's TV analysts who do that. There's coaches who do that. There's sports betting people who do that. Our job, my job, is to tell the most interesting stories about the people involved in sports. So in that regard, the fact that you don't really love sports doesn't matter too much because the people that you're writing about, the athletes, they have great stories to tell that are not really even related to sports. The reason you're writing about these people is that they're athletes and people are interested in their lives. But what's so great, especially in college, that every college athlete has a story to tell. And, here's the thing. No one, you say you don't really care a lot about sports. Well, outside of probably men's and women's basketball, probably not too many people outside of players and their families care all that much about the win-loss record of your, any volleyball team or baseball team. Most people probably are not following those teams closely in terms of what happens on the field. Yet you could still write stories that people want to read because they transcend sports, because they're about this athlete's journey to getting to Manhattan College, that something happened in his or her childhood, something that's happening in his and her life off the field or off the court. And I think for everyone, that should be your goal, to find those kinds of stories. In fact, I find often there's a benefit sometimes to being a little detached. I think when you're really too sort of immersed in the sports world, you get sort of tunnel vision, you lose sight of what's actually interesting because all you're thinking about is like, how many points did this person score? What's this person's batting average? And you sort of don't see the forest through the trees, to use a cliche. So coming in with those fresh eyes, I think is really great. You're going to see things that others who really love sports might take for granted. My wife has no interest in sports at all. And sometimes I'll have a baseball game on and she'll ask a question and I'll be like, that's a really good question. And it's something I never would have thought about because I'm too in it. So I would say don't think of it as writing about sports. Think of it as writing about these people the way you'd write about anybody, and find something interesting to say about them. I've covered many events that the game itself no one cared about, except for, again, the athletes and their families. And it's still my job to make it interesting. And I think if you're a good journalist, you'll be able to do it.
All right, let's go to John Deutsch. Introduce yourself to Jared and inquire away.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm John Deutsch. I'm a com major with a concentration in journalism and a film studies minor. Yeah, so yeah, I came here a little late, so I don't know. So I think I missed some stuff, but I just want you mentioned like how sports journalism doesn't get viewed as journalism that much. Do you think it might have something to do with like how like certain sports in the past have portrayed like toxic masculinity and kind of like erratic fan culture? Do you think there might be some correlation with that, or?
Yeah, that's interesting. It definitely could play a role. I think we're definitely seeing a reckoning in our industry about some of these issues that sports journalists did ignore for a long time. And I do think to some extent the fact that sports journalists ignored some of these bigger issues made it so that other journalists could say, well, you're not really being a journalist if you're not acknowledging these issues. I actually think it started even earlier than that, to a time when essentially sports journalism was just essentially an extension of the team itself. Sports writers were essentially just fans of the team that would go hang out drinking with players after the game. And, they were not covering the game sports objectively. They were sort of more covering it from the perspective of like a fan, or covering it sort of from the perspective of like, it's my job to protect the mythical status, of these athletes. If we go back and read, say, like Grantland Rice or some of these old-time amazing writers, amazing sports writers that elevated these athletes and these mythical beings, I think a lot of times those stories weren't actually true, and they were designed to sort of sell more tickets to games and lift these people up, maybe in ways they didn't deserve. And over time, as sports writing, the industry and our fields become more critical, more objective, and stop treating athletes as deities and treating them as human beings and writing about them the way we'd write about anything. Like I said, Major League Baseball is a $12 billion industry. It is an enormous business, which means I am not covering games. That's what Major League Baseball would like me to do, is cover it as games. But I'm not. I'm covering a $12 billion business, and it should be covered with the seriousness of any other $12 billion business that the Wall Street Journal would cover. And I think increasingly over the last X number of decades, that's become more understood, and it's changed the industry, I think, in a good way.
Thanks. So we do have a couple of active athletes in the room who have their hands up. So why don't we go to them and they can inquire about sports coverage with you.
Yes, I'd love that.
And they're also, I believe, both interested in covering and writing about sports as well. So Christina Katsumori, you had your hand up first, so we'll go to you.
Hi, my name is Christina Katsumori, and I am in the women's basketball team. I am an international student from Greece, and I am majoring in communications and concentration in journalism. I am not going to go to sports media and stuff, not because I don't love sports, I do, but I have a little more love for social justice and human rights. So hopefully I'll go towards there, but you never know. I am taking a broadcasting class this semester with Professor Michael Queen, so I kind of have an idea with sports, and I really enjoy it. My question for you is that apparently you have seen and experienced so many things, and as a future mentor to us, what do you think is the biggest lesson you have to give to your students, and what do you wish they will take out of your class? What's your vision as a future mentor to the future sports journalists?
Yes, thank you for asking. I was planning on talking a little bit about my class at some point during this, so this is a good opportunity to do it. I should preface this by saying, I'm still figuring out exactly what the class is going to be. I have a lot of ideas, and I still have to figure out which ones are feasible and which ones are not. So I don't want to get too specific about exactly what the class is going to be. But what I do know it's going to be is that it's going to hopefully give the students in it a really broad look at sports writing and getting to write about sports from many different angles. Sort of all the things that I talked about all the sort of different hats sports writers have to wear. I expect that to be part of the class. At some point during the semester, the students will wear all of those hats. and learn how to handle a beat and learn how to report and write. But in terms of what I really want everyone to take away from it, it's sort of actually a little what I've talked about before, which is sports writing is not really at all or very much about writing about X's and O's and writing about statistics and writing about what happened in the game that most people just watched on TV. What it's really about, and that as sports writers, we have the ability to make a real impact. You mentioned social justice. Well, sports and professional sports and college sports has been at the forefront for generations in promoting social justice in society, which means as a sports writer, if you're not writing about those issues, you are failing and not doing your job, especially now in this world of technology. Remember, if I'm writing about baseball, I'm writing about games that every person could watch on TV or could log on to Twitter and find out exactly what happened the second after it happened. There is no reason for them to wait for some article that I'm going to write to tell them about the game, which means that what this job really is about is writing about all of these issues. It's writing about sort of these bigger picture things and bringing them to light and making a real impact. And what I want the class to show is that in sports writing and in this field, you have a real opportunity to make a real impact. And in social justice is just one way of that, as we're seeing, have seen for generations, but really seeing now, because this is obviously a sort of a golden moment for sports and social justice with Colin Kaepernick and the NBA. It's a remarkable time in that regard. And that's really what I want to impart in the class, is that what we do as sports writers could really be important. It could really make a difference. And we could do it through this lens of sports, which really provides this incredible window into our society and how we live.
Right, because it's very important, and as an athlete, I can really relate with that. And I really like the fact that you know that there's more than just, oh, who scored, who hit the winning shot, and because it is more than that. So that's important. Thank you very much.
And if anyone's out there, I'd be very interested in reading a story about how a basketball player from Greece ended up at Manhattan College. So if someone wants to write that story, I would definitely read it.
Thank you.
Well, the quadrangle does take first-person stories, so you should talk to Pete Gianni, our sports editor, who's in this call, to see about fleshing out our sports section a little bit with those personal stories too. And then, of course, we will attract Jared as a reader to our publication. Colleen McNamara, you are up next. You are still muted.
Colleen, where's Colleen?
There you go. You good?
Hi, I'm Colleen. I'm a freshman communication major. I really loved what you said about how it's more about writing about people and that kind of aspect, because writing for sports, I always find that my best stories are when I had a really interesting interview. So I guess my question for you was, what was an interview that really changed your perspective on the athlete or kind of the sport, something along those lines?
Oh, that's a really good question. An interview that really changed my perspective on the athlete. I want to think about college, because I feel like in college, you really have this incredible opportunity that you don't get in the professional world, to write about your peers in such an incredible way. One of the coolest parts about being a student journalist is, yes, you're writing about athletes, but you're also writing about people that you theoretically be in class with. Okay, I have one. This is interesting. So again, I'm going to say a name that's probably not going to mean anything to anyone in this room anymore, because I'm just old. But my senior year of college, I was covering the Syracuse football team, and they did something very strange, which is they brought a new quarterback to campus by the name of Greg Paulus. Some of you may know who Greg Paulus was. He was the point guard at Duke for 4 years. He was a local kid. He was from the Syracuse area, from upstate New York. He was an amazing high school football player who decided to play basketball in college, and was I would say, generally disliked figure as a college basketball player, because he played at Duke and everyone hates Duke. Yes, current head coach of Niagara for basketball, I believe. Someone just put in the chat. So you might know who he is from that. So Syracuse decided to bring him back to play football. He had not played football in over 4 years, not picked up a football in over 4 years. And he ended up becoming the starting quarterback at Syracuse, in part because Syracuse is very bad at football, and this was a great way to get a local boy in there and sell tickets. But anyway, I was very cynical. I think everyone was very cynical about Greg coming. The guy was sort of this point guard at Duke. No one liked him because no one liked anything from Duke, and he hadn't played football in all this time, and it felt like this incredible, just cynical stunt. And I got to know him really well, actually, that year, and I talked to him a lot. And I was told my whole perspective on him changed so dramatically over the course of the season. I really came to realize how important this was to him, how while maybe the fans saw it as this cynical thing, to him it was super earnest, and all he really wanted was this one more opportunity to play football, like this other sport that he loved, and he never thought he would have the opportunity to play it again. And he didn't know where his life was going to go after his basketball career. It was clear he wasn't going to play professional basketball, which at one point was his dream, and it clearly wasn't going to happen. And by the end of the season, I had this whole new outlook on him. And I really came to like him personally, but also my whole feeling about what he was doing, trying to go play football, was totally changed over the course of the year. And it sort of reminded me that you have to go into these things sort of with as much of a blank slate as you can, and not bring in your own preconceived notions or biases or cynicism into these things, because I had done that, and it took me a little time to sort of warm up to this guy and what he was doing. And I'm glad that I did. So sort of was a good lesson in, like, don't prejudge anyone, don't prejudge stories, go in interviews with a totally blank slate and be willing to have your mind changed and let the story sort of come to you instead of you thinking you know the stories and try to fit it into this narrative that you came up with on your own.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Let's go to Pete Janney, who you have met previously, but I think that he certainly has many questions related to sports, some of which I imagine he'd like to ask you now.
How you doing, Jared?
Hi, Pete.
I'm Pete Janney, for anyone who doesn't know me. Current business analytics major, minor in communication, and sports editor at the Quadrangle. I feel really embarrassed right now because I got Jared's age wrong in the story I wrote about him. But I hope you enjoyed the story. It was a pleasure writing about your career. But my question for you is kind of about the subscription model of journalism that has come to digital journalism, especially. Of course, you write for the Wall Street Journal, which is a big subscription-based paper. And when you think of subscription-based papers, it kind of gives rise to the importance of trying to find subjects and topics that are very unique and kind of differentiate yourself, as you've talked about, as you've really talked about at length in this call. So can you kind of talk to us about the future of subscription-based journalism and really kind of the intricacies of that, and what your experience has been like writing for a publication that fits that mold?
Sure, yes. Hey, very quick, first lesson. If you're in my class and you get someone's name or age wrong, big trouble on that story. So good lesson on that one. I'm just kidding, Pete. It's okay. But yeah, it's a good lesson on always ask that question. I feel like every journalist, not only did ask how old someone is, ask when their birthday is. Because very often you'll do an interview 2 days before that person's birthday, and the story will run 3 days later, and the age is wrong by the time the story runs. So good lesson there for everyone who's going to be in my class. But to answer your question about sort of the future of journalism and how journalism is going to make money, look, obviously, if I had the great answer to that question, I would not be in this room, and I would go trying to save journalism. But I think we have seen some progress with a subscription model. For a long time, when the internet was sort of just starting, everyone sort of just put all their stuff up for free on the internet. Everything was free. And the thought process was, okay, historically with the newspaper, the way it worked was advertising funded the journalism, and people's subscription cost, all that did was fund the ink in the paper and the delivery of the paper. So now we're getting rid of that part of the equation. So all we really need is the advertising. Of course, what no one really understood at the time was advertising revenue would be slashed by like 75% on the internet, because online advertising doesn't quite work in the same way that print advertising did. So everyone had this huge reckoning where they're like, oh my God, the whole model is completely broken. We have to figure out something else. And everyone's now been rushing to a subscription model. The Wall Street Journal, interestingly, was never free. The Wall Street Journal had a subscription model from day one. It was roundly criticized by everyone else in the media. Turned out to be vindicated because everyone else is doing it. So I do believe the future of journalism is paying for it. I think we have to continue to remind people that what we do costs money. To do good doing good journalism is very expensive. Doing good investigative journalism is very expensive. It requires traveling and meeting people and getting documents. It's not sort of a let's just call people on my phone and write sort of thing. I think we're doing a better job as an industry of conditioning people to understand that journalism is expensive and people need to pay for it. Of course, what's going to happen, especially with local news in particular, is still an open question. As I'm sure some of you know, due to the consolidation of local news, there are now, many Congress people that have no one covering them because there's no media outlet in their district anymore, which is terrible. It's really bad. Now there's no one holding those representatives accountable, for example. But what gives me optimism is that the demand for what we do has never been higher. The demand to read journalism is growing daily. It is still so enormous. There's this voracious appetite around the country for good journalism. So I still believe that as long as that's there, we'll find a way to make it work from an economic standpoint. I don't think we know exactly what it's going to look like yet, but the good news is there's still interest in what we do. And I think as long as that's the case, and I hope that always will be the case, we're going to make it work.
And Jared, if I could just follow up on that real quickly, kind of the challenges of subscription-based models with sports. Do you think that's a bit more glaring in terms of trying to differentiate on whether you're covering baseball or basketball, just trying to make your content stand out for people who are looking for very specific content?
Yeah, I look at, obviously the big sports publication right now that everyone knows about is The Athletic. The Athletic has been seen as a pretty big disruptor in our industry, coming in with a 100% subscription model from day one, hiring lots of really excellent premium journalists, and putting them behind a paywall and hoping people would pay to read them. But what The Athletic understood from day one is that no one's going to pay to read about a game that they just watched on TV the night before. Why would they? There's a million places to read about the game the night before for free. You probably watched the game yourself. So what The Athletic is doing, actually, is similar to what the Wall Street Journal has tried to do with its sports section, for years before The Athletic ever started, which is everything that we write should be impactful. It should be original. It should be creative. I feel like sometimes people don't think of journalism as creative. Like they think of there's nonfiction writing and there's creative writing, but I think journalism is very creative and should be very creative if you're doing the job well. Because if you're writing stories that anybody else has written ever, there's really no point of someone paying to read yours. They'll just go read the other one, which means everything that you write, you want to be something that's new, something that's fresh, something that's original, something that someone might actually think is worth paying for. And the way you get someone to do that is to write stories that no one else has written before, stories that get people talking and saying, hey, I read this really interesting thing in The Athletic or in the Wall Street Journal about Fernando Tatis owing $30 million to this random company. You really should go check it out. So I hope that answers your question. It just comes down to being creative and being original. And I think getting out of the mindset that journalism or sort of nonfiction writing in general isn't a creative endeavor, because I absolutely believe it is. And I think if you lose sight of that, you end up with sort of stale journalism.
Thank you, Jared.
So we have a few more questions, which I think we still have time for. Yes.
I have time. Whatever's
Okay.
good for you guys.
All right. Let's go to Kieran Sullivan. You are up, sir.
Hey, I want to thank you for coming, Jared. My name's Kieran Sullivan. I'm a communications major with a concentration in sports media and sports media production. And I just wanted to ask, you mentioned a ton of like great advice. My question is, if you could go back to your college self before taking on the workforce, what would you tell yourself to prepare for the future, and what you would encounter later in your life and your career?
I give myself advice when I'm back in college. Try to have fun. Try to not stress too much. Don't be as stressed as I probably was. Be the big one. I know that's impossible to do when you're in college, but of course, like everyone, when you're trying to figure out what your professional life is going to be, it's terrifying, and you think that everything you do is going to like ruin your life forever. And if you don't do this, or this, you have no chance of ever making it or doing anything and making anything of yourself. So that's a big one. Like try to let yourself off the hook a little bit. And I think, but like in all seriousness, the other thing I would try to say to myself to like set myself up is, take advantage of the resources that are there. I mean, for me, when I was in college, my whole life was the student paper. I mean, literally, it was all I cared about, all I did. And I probably missed out on some things that the school had to offer, resources the school had that may have actually been helpful to me. So take advantage of it. I mean, you're surrounded now by incredible professors, people that have been in this industry who will be able to help you. So just use those resources that you have. You only have this opportunity now. Once you're out of school, you don't have like suddenly this incredible network of people that just so you could just go talk to whenever you want. So take advantage of it. Try to enjoy yourself and try not to stress too much about the future. Like take the future seriously, but also try to have fun because it really will be okay.
All right, thank you. And I just have a quick one.
Sure.
You mentioned you were in the Yankees locker room. You said you grew up in Westchester, so you're probably a Yankee fan. Who have you been like in your professional career? Who have you been the most starstruck from?
Excellent question. The most starstruck. Yeah, so you try really hard not to ever be starstruck, of course. You gotta like talk to people. But I would say like people I've been in clubhouse with that I was like totally I was on an elevator with Sandy Koufax. That was pretty insane. That was a big like I did not even know what to say moment. It's really like the old time guys, like Willie Mays, Hank Aaron. He recently died. Those are the ones that you're still just like, I'm still just kind of like, oh my God. Oh, and a really weird one. I wouldn't say starstruck by this person, but very sort of like, I can't believe I'm actually talking to you, was when I got to go spend time with Warren Buffett for a story. Super random, but that was like really bizarre. And I was kind of like, you're Warren Buffett and I'm 24 years old. Okay. Yeah, those are a few that jumped to mind.
All right, we'll go to Josh Sawyer next.
Hi, Jared. I'm Josh. I'm communication major with a concentration in sports media production. I'm looking forward to taking your class in the fall. One, and thank you for being here. Two, I just have a baseball question for you. Within the industry right now, I know I've seen kind of like they're kind of preparing for some pretentious arguments back and forth and some labor disputes, but what is like your opinion on that, and where do you see that going with their disputes?
Yes, it's going to be crazy. So for those of you who don't follow baseball closely, baseball is constantly having labor strife between the owners and the players. Their agreement, their basic collective bargaining agreement, expires in December, and the relationship between them is miserable. And we're all anticipating a complete supernova disaster when they have to try to go negotiate a new contract, and it could very, very, let's say possibly, but probably more like likely result in some sort of work stoppage heading into next year. Yeah, it's gonna be bad. but it's going to be super fun for me to cover. This is the kind of stuff that as a journalist, I just live for. I'm so excited to cover the labor dispute. I'm seriously looking forward to it. And I think it's sort of a good lesson in how to manage a beat. Their contracts are 5 years, their collective bargaining agreements. I have essentially spent the last 5 years gearing up for this year. Getting sourced up, getting to know all the people involved who negotiate the contract, the union leaders, baseball's lawyers, and people that run the show. And I've spent really like a lot of time over the last 4.5 years trying to meet these people and, like I said, build up those trusting relationships. These are people that for most of the last 4 years, really I did not need to be talking to for anything I was working on much. The pandemic sort of changed that equation, but generally speaking, didn't need to talk to these people. But I still spent a lot of time talking and meeting, getting to know these people, knowing that 5 years from then, there's going to be this huge thing that's going to blow up. And suddenly all those relationships that I've cultivated over all that time are going to come in huge handy and allow me to, if everything goes well, be sort of a big driver of the news on this topic. So as a journalist, this is like the fun part. This is hopefully when I'll see the fruit of my labors for the last X number of years. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in my class because this will all be going on during our class. Their contract expires December 1st. So I'm sure in November, this will probably come up a little bit in the class. If I come in one day seeming very, very stressed out, that's probably why.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. And Maddie Johnson, shoot.
Hi, Jared. You might hear some background noise, my neighbors. My question was that, my time in the quadrangle as web editor, and I'm also studying integrated marketing communications. I'm a junior. We learn a lot about how to handle crisis situations between quad and getting mistakes or putting out certain information or other things. And so I was thinking about the Kobe Bryant situation where TMZ got in some trouble for putting out private information early before authorities could get to. So I wanted to know how you responded to that, what you think journalists and other publications can learn from something like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I'm having serious flashbacks, like seeing people in dorms. It's really like freaking me out. I'm like, I haven't been in a dorm in a very, very long time. So as for your question about that, it's a really tricky question. I'm not, I think everyone, you could ask this question to 10 people and probably get 10 different answers. So I'll just give you mine, and hopefully I'll just tell you what I think about it. One, clearly in journalism, you'll hear this all the time. It truly is more important to be right than it is to be first. It's sort of a cliche in our field, but it is really true. It doesn't really matter if you're fast if what you're putting out is wrong. Yes, it is always worth taking the extra time to make sure what you're going to publish is true, even if it means that someone else gets to it first. 100% of the time, it is always the right call, especially because at the end of the day, in the modern media world, no one remembers really who breaks these kind of stories. Like no one remembers who was the first person to tweet that, blah, blah, blah was traded to this team. No one remembers that. Maybe people in the industry do, but no fans, no readers remember that stuff. So always take the time to make sure that you're right. What's tricky about the Kobe Bryant situation specifically, is that they kind of were right. They just put it out there before the authorities had informed the family. So then it becomes a sort of an ethical issue, an issue of sort of sensitivity and what like the right thing to do in that situation is. And it's a tricky one. It is a really tricky situation. On the one hand, like TMZ had this earth-shattering story that was true and they knew was true, and that they, if they had waited too long, they might not be the only ones to know about it. And if they don't put it out there, someone else will. On the other hand, you're dealing with real people and real emotions, and you do have to sort of be sensitive to your sources, the people you're writing about in that way. So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, like you do have to always make this calculation of like, is it worth it in this moment to put it out now when sort of it hasn't been, when it has, in the instance of a death, like the family has not been informed. You know, I don't think I even really know like the right answer. Like, what would I do as a journalist if I had heard that Kobe Bryant had died, or I saw it myself? Like, what would I do? No, I don't know. I think the key is like, did you acquire the information ethically yourself? No, you talk TMZ specifically often doesn't. They'll often pay for information, which is something that generally reputable journalists won't do. The Wall Street Journal certainly wouldn't. No real reputable publication would pay for information, what TMZ does. So I do think if you acquire information ethically, you know, you have some responsibility to report it, but report it as sensitively as you can. I also think it's really also crucial in what I do, and what we do as journalists, is you always have to reach out to the people you're writing about, right? No one should ever be blindsided by anything you write. At the Journal, we call it like the no surprises policy. Essentially, if someone's name is going to appear in a story I write, I have to call that person. Essentially, that's like, it's not quite that cut and dry, but especially in sports, if I'm writing about someone hitting a home run, I don't need to go tell them that. But generally speaking, no one should ever read a story and be surprised that he or she is in it. So it's sort of tangential to what you asked, but I do think that's something that a lot of people don't understand is like, no, we have to be very sensitive to these issues, making sure we go to these people and talk to them and let them know what we're going to write before we do. Once you do that, yeah, it's your responsibility, I think, to report it, but do it sensitively and ethically.
Noel, is that a new hand up from you?
So I would be kicking myself if I didn't ask this before we finish. Are you a Mets fan or a Yankees fan?
I get that question a lot. Who do you root for? It comes up a lot. And I know this is probably not the answer everyone wants to hear, but probably the one they know that's coming. And the answer is I don't. Nobody. It is, I couldn't do my job if I were also rooting for a team. You know, there are things that I root for. I root for good stories, always. You know, I'm always going to root for the outcome that provides the most drama, or that provides the most sort of fun, interesting thing to write about. I'll always root for that. And of course, you get to know these people. So of course, there's like people that I know and that I like, that I would like to have success. And I'm happy when they have success and are disappointed when they don't. But the reality is, in this job, you are required to check that at the door. And the reality is not as hard as you think. When you cover this industry, the idea of sort of rooting for a team to win or not win, I was actually almost surprised how easy it was to drop that. And it was replaced by sort of rooting for good stories, rooting for individual people to do interesting, amazing, fascinating things that would give me something to write about. So that's really where the perspective I come from. The one thing I do always tell people, though, I was a Yankees fan as a kid. My dad and my brother are huge Yankees fans. And I grew up, I was 8 years old in 1996, so those were my heroes as a kid. But I will say, having been in the industry now, if I were to, you know, ever leave the industry and be a fan again, I would probably have, if I had to choose, I would probably choose the Mets now over the Yankees. I think they're just more fun, more interesting. So I see you're a Mets fan, so you could have that one.
As a resident of Queens and as the journalism head, I feel like these are excellent places to sort of wind these things down with a pro-Mets vote and a pro-journalism ethics vote. So I think that this was a really excellent conversation. I'm very grateful for you being here and for everybody who is able to come sort of inside the meet to talk about your work, to talk about what sports journalism looks like now, and to give us and those watching like a good a deeper knowledge of what this is all about. And so we're very grateful for that.
Thank you. And yeah, I hope I get to see some of you in my class in the fall. I really have a lot of ideas and big plans that hopefully are actually things that we could actually do and execute. But I really do believe it's going to be a great sort of look into what we do. And I actually really hope the class is, we'll at least have a component of what we did tonight, letting you all get to talk about the industry with someone who's in it. I hope that I'm able to sort of provide that while also giving you guys like a good foundation in this field, and hopefully, see how it goes. Hopefully, get you guys to get to really go talk to some athletes and interview some people and meet a lot of other really cool people in the field that could give talks just like this. So I hope to see some of you, I guess August, September. I don't know when it starts, but sometime around
last week of August.
Last week of August.
Thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'd like to thank Dr. Nick Gilowitz, our head of our journalism concentration, and Dr. Michael Quinn, the head of our sports media concentration, for moderating this event this evening. We also have listening in tonight Dr. Shia Anwar, who is the head of our public relations and our integrated marketing communications concentrations at Manhattan College. Jared's going to be teaching sports reporting and writing Monday nights at 6:30 this fall. That's Com 336. Give you a little special plug out for that. Com 336 this fall. We hope it's the beginning of a long continuing relationship between Jared and Manhattan College. So I'd like to take a moment now to, first of all, thank very much Jared Diamond for being here tonight and having this great conversation with you. If the class is half as good as the conversation has been tonight, it's going to be a great success. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you to our moderators, but most importantly, thank you to our students. Those were amazing questions. I know that you came here interested in having this conversation, and I'm just incredibly impressed by how in-depth this conversation was and how much information we got in such a short amount of time. For any prospective students who might be watching on the live stream, I will be posting the live stream. We had a little bit of an audio issue at the beginning, but we fixed it. So I'm going to do a quick edit and get that posted. And we will have that live stream up and posted on YouTube so that you can review later with the audio this time. If you have any questions about the program at all, feel free to email me at michael.kowalski@manhattan.edu. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, but for now, I'd like to thank everyone for watching this evening. It's been a real pleasure listening in, and I took so many notes. I was really amazed by this. So thank you everyone for this evening, and we'll see you, Jared Diamond, this fall on the campus at Manhattan College.